Jean DeWolff is one of my favorite supporting characters in Spider-Man. She's a bit of an obscure character, making only a handful of appearances during a decade-long period, which culminated in one of the best Spider-Man stories of all time. One that has quite a unique place in Spider-Man history as an all-time classic that could be described as kind of unadaptable and thus will probably remain as a bit of an underrated story despite its status amongst comic book readers. The Wolf never had a prominent adaptation nor a big role in a video game. In fact, later Spider-Man writers created Yuri Watanabe, who bears similarities to Jean as they're both cops who work with Spider-Man. I love The Wolf, but with Yuri rising to prominence, I doubt The Wolf will ever get the chance to shine. That's why I'm here. I might as well be the one to spread the love. The Wolf was created in 1976 for Marvel Team-Up by Bill Mantlo and Sal Buscema. She wouldn't appear in the main Spider-Man series until 1982 in Roger Stern's run. She appears a few times here and there, but then disappears completely for like a year. The Wolf's first story is probably her most meaningful appearance. It centers around her. She's put front and center in order to show off this new character, and it's all pretty good. There's a mysterious new villain running around called Wraith, and we slowly, over the course of the story, discover the mystery villain. Wraith is tied to the Wolf's family, and the case becomes much more personal than ever expected. The writer, Bill Mantlo, tries really hard to make her appear cool. She's chain-smoking police captain, she's focused on getting the job done. The male cops struggle with taking orders from a female captain, so they try to talk down to her, but she puts them back in their place. Interestingly though, the story shows her tough guy bravado is just an act. A bomb plane flies through her window, as you do, and she freezes as she's afraid of dying. Only family we get to see from her is her father, who's stern and unloving towards her. He's a raging misogynist who seems to straight up hate his daughter, and it honestly gets to the point that it goes from horrifying to kind of funny. Fainted, just like a woman. No true detective would allow himself to be manipulated. But a woman might. There's no need to say these things. He just goes out of his ways to twist a knife. I hate him, but he's got a comical with just how over the top he is. The Wolf story is about a woman overcoming sexist expectations. Many men are set up against her for doing a man's job, and she has to prove to them and herself she's up for it. She's not exactly a subtle character by any means, and I'd say the original is a bit too strong and with its messaging. I like her later appearances more as they allow her to exist and just be a cool police character, and she's treated as an equal with gender not playing a role in it. If you wanna, you can think of it as her overcoming her insecurities and proving to everybody she deserves to be the captain. We have defeated sexism. Hooray! She adds some much needed personality to the cops, who are a major part of Spider-Man. Spider-Man has historically had a difficult relationship with cops, ranging from being New York's most wanted to being a trusted ally. Despite that, there's been shockingly few police characters in the series. Captain Stacy is the most famous, but in the comics, he was retired, so his character barely gave any insight to law enforcement. She might have been our first proper police POV. Writer Roger Stern fleshed out other cops as well, with Jean being, at least to me, a particular standout. To be fair, the tough seen-it-all detective is one of my favorite archetypes, so she's right up my alley anyways. The Wolf might not sound super impressive as a character, a secondary character who's, likable with one major story, big deal. Well, after a year-long break in the comics, she got to be the centerpiece of one of the most important Spider-Man stories of all time. I read through Spider-Man in order, pretty much all of it, and I would argue this one's for a milestone for Spider-Man comics as the watershed moment between Bronze Age and whatever comes next, whatever you want to call it. Let's call it Dark Age. This story begins by giving us Jean DeWolff's thoughts on her life. She recalls on how her father never loved her. She took this to heart. Rejected by her father, she would go on to try to find love from her stepfather, who was a cop. He loved her and she loved him. She took to the police life. She wanted to make him proud. She became the best cop around. She had to be tougher and smarter, so she was. She never let anyone get the idea she made her way through nepotism. The Wolf became a captain, and she is planning on making her stepfather proud by becoming the first female police commissioner. And we cut to police rushing into her apartment, where she thinks to herself, wonder why I was just thinking of that just now. And then we reveal that she has passed away. This story begins with her death. And it's shocking, it's gruesome. This is one of the most violent scenes in Spider-Man, and probably is literally the most violent image in Spider-Man's history by this point. The rest of the story follows Spider-Man as he investigates the murder of his friend. As the story goes on, the murderer keeps killing, revealing Spider-Man isn't chasing a murderer this time, but a full-blown serial killer. Spider-Man is joined by Daredevil, who loses a friend to Sin Eater, and Detective Stan Carter, a detective working on the case for the police. This story is quite unique in Spider-Man's history, as it still to this day is one of the only stories that kind of, feels more like it fits more into Daredevil or Punisher or Jessica Jones type stories. Death of Jean DeWolff is written by Peter David and is penciled by Rich Buckler, with inks by a lot of people. Jesus, what happened here? Peter David was still new to Spider-Man, having only written 3 issues of Spectacular before this. Peter David's run hasn't been compiled to an easy-to-read omnibus, which I really hope Marvel will fix soon. This run deserves to be read as it's one of the highlights of all Spider-Man. Peter David is one of the great Spider-Man writers. He would go on to write Spider-Man 2099. He's an industry legend, but in recent years he has faced medical issues with kidney failure, strokes, and a heart attack. As with anyone who has bad luck, he has been struggling with the awful American healthcare system. He has a GoFundMe set up, so if you are able and willing, you can help one of the all-time great comic book writers with his medical bills. Now, let's look at Death of Jean DeWolff a little more closely. A continued theme from the first story is the theme of misogyny. Sexism is back, baby. DeWolff's father rejected her due to his sexism. He was so adamant about wanting a boy, he refused to love his girl. This sexism drives DeWolff desperately to win her stepfather's approval. She becomes a cop to win him over. She tries to win in a male-dominated field. From day one, she's fighting against sexism. She is murdered by Sin Eater. Sin Eater explains that the reason he did it is because he wanted to. Sin Eater goes after women because he hates them. He calls them harlots and he takes joy in their punishment. DeWolff begins her life with misogyny and she dies by misogyny, never fully able to escape it. As DeWolff passes, we transition to Peter Parker taking a picture of a well-endowed woman. A man's perspective on a woman being the connecting factor. I don't know, I just really wanted to share this panel because Peter is just standing there recording her like, bro, what are you doing? He even says it's just for him to keep. Like, dude's a menace. This is so important as it is the first thing we're shown in the entire story. A woman hurt by misogyny, dying due to misogyny, and then Peter gazing upon a woman. The villain is motivated by sexism. The second major theme of the story is justice, and more specifically vigilante justice, represented by the 3 major vigilantes of the story. Spider-Man, Sin Eater, and Daredevil. All 3 take justice into their own hands, and the story asks what separates a good vigilante from a bad one. All of them decide on their own who needs to be punished based on nothing but their internal code. Sin Eater is a horrifying mirror to Spider-Man, a man trying to do what he believes is right, just like Spider-Man, except Sin Eater's values are completely and utterly twisted. You might want to say Spider-Man is good, but he can snap any time. There's countless cases of Spider-Man losing in it and coming close to doing something bad. In this story, he beats Sin Eater so hard he loses his ability to walk. Just because Spider-Man is doing what we consider right now, doesn't mean he is overall a good thing. The story isn't trying to say Spider-Man bad, actually, but it's questioning, which I find quite compelling. The third major theme is the cost of heroism. Spider-Man chases Sin Eater. Sin Eater fires a shotgun at Spider-Man. Spider-Man does what he always does and dodges. Because Spider-Man moves out of the way, the pellets hit a civilian. Spider-Man ends up feeling guilty about this and he talks to Carter about it, and we get a great scene of the two sharing the difficulty of carrying your failures. It's not glorious, it's not particularly heroic, it's just weight you gotta carry when you do a job like this. You will make mistakes and it will come at a price, and no one's perfect enough to avoid this. It's a realistic dimension to doing jobs like this. The Death of Jean DeWolff grapples with difficult themes, and it doesn't give easy answers. It leaves it up to the reader to come up with their own answers. This specifically is what I consider to be the difference between Death of Jean DeWolff and all the stories that came before. I believe the difference between Bronze Age stories and the new Dark Age stories of the 80s is a sophistication. Bronze Age dealt with darker subjects, yes, but they could be very simplistic in the way they portrayed things. I mean, just look at DeWolff's first appearance. The stories are blunt and in your face about the messages. Some of them feel like straight up PSAs, so more than stories, and although I'm sure that was literally the case on many occasions, it's not the best exploration of that kind of thing. During this new era for Spider-Man, starting with Death of Jean DeWolff, these stories feel like they're more subtle and more complex. Death of Jean DeWolff never tells you sexism is bad. The writers show you restraint with them, or when the characters have debates, it feels more real, like you have flawed characters debating each other instead of messages being forced down your throat. And watching imperfect characters have debates is far more compelling to me than watching PSAs or somebody morally correct explaining what is the correct takeaway. Let me know how you feel about the story in the comments, because it's one worth discussing, and I'd love to know your thoughts on the story and the art as well, because I personally felt the art to be a particular standout in this story. 90% of Spider-Man comics up to this point shared an art style. Every single one looked like a variation on John Romita Sr.'s style. John Romita Jr., very funny enough, was the first one to break away from the signature Spider-Man look. During this era of mid-80s, Amazing Spider-Man was drawn by Ron Frenz, who based on his style on Steve Ditko's original style. Then there is this book, Spectacular Spider-Man, which had a few different artists, but the one I want to highlight is the artist of Death of Gene Wolfe, which is Rich Buckler, who did Death of Gene Wolfe, and I believe did the most issues during Peter Davis' run on Spectacular. I believe he was the most common artist. I might be wrong, but his art style is a bit of a standout because he breaks away from Romita's. I feel like the art revolution in Spider-Man doesn't really happen until McFarlane's run. That's up next, so subscribe if you want to see more about that. But I do think Rich Buckler's art here, and in general this era of art, is starting to really heavily break away from Romita, setting up those other art style. But it still does look like it's kind of inspired. It still has its ties in the Marvel look, what it's supposed to look like. But you can see that breakaway, and it makes the story much more effective overall. As it's, of course, a gorgeous book with an effective atmosphere, but it also feels like it's a bit more of a breaking point for Peter. Peter's arc during this era as a whole is disillusionment with the role of Spider-Man. He becomes angry and wants to quit, and a big catalyst for that is the death of one of his trusted friends, the Wolf. The art is gritty, there's heavy shadows looming over everyone. The inks by all the inkers elevate the art. You get this scene with Peter running to protect Ernie, and his face is a little ugly with all the shadows, and it really strikes you with that sense of panic and fury. These thugs are attacking an old man, and shots like these are what makes you feel the story. Betty Brant gets attacked, and before she gets hit with a barrel full of pellet fun, you get these shots of her face. Many panels of zooming in, forcing you to look at the victim's fear. It's very cinematic with the way it's composed. The art does a magnificent job of conveying the story, and it's new grounds for Spider-Man. The series broke into a new territory as Peter's world has forever changed by the sheer needless brutality of Sin Eater. Green Goblin killed people. He was petty and delighted in the personal revenge, but at least he had a goal, a reason. A Goblin didn't honestly kill a lot of people. Now that I think about it, he managed to kill Gwen and nobody else. Maybe Strom, but he might have had a heart attack at the same exact moment Norman shot him, so Goblin's KD might genuinely be 0 by this point. What a loser. Norman was a killer and ruthless, but the horror of it was they emphasized by not having it appear on the page, except for like one time, and even that has no gore and is tame, all things considered. Sin Eater is just nuts. It's completely pointless, and there's a new kind of evil to Spider-Man to face. The bodies of the victims are on full display here. You're forced to look at them. The way he fires off his shotgun and screams at women before falling into a rageful rant is just full of exaggerated swagger of an insane psychopath. It's the first time you really feel the weight of murder. It's to a degree random. Spider-Man struggles with loss and that turns him angry, more violent. He comes close to snapping. He's ready to let Sin Eater to die, or he's even ready to just straight up kill him. Now, admittedly though, I love Death of Gene Wolfe, but I'd love to have seen more in-depth look into Betty's thoughts as she used to hate Spider-Man and Spider-Man goes down on Sin Eater who tries to kill her. I'd imagine there could be some juicy emotions there worth exploring. Considering the topic, I believe the story could benefit from a proper female POV. Maybe it's excusable as it is a story about how men view women, but there's no follow-up. I don't know if Spider-Man has ever delved deeper into Betty's thoughts on these type of things, which is just straight up missed opportunity, which is a shame. The story is from exclusively men's point of views, but it is about the wolf and her shadow looms heavy over the narrative. She only appears at the start in her flashbacks and her death panel. Despite that, you're always thinking about her every step of the way. I do think it is an effective way to show grief, and I do love this comic, but once again, I wish there was more to her life. I would have liked to have seen more from her family. Despite the story being super effective, I am left wishing for more of a women's POV overall, and I think a perfect middle ground would have been to explore Betty and the Wolf, and maybe even the Wolf's family's POV before or after this story. It's the biggest flaw of the story to me. The Wolf's family is super important to her story. It's about how she's introduced with a villain who ties into her family, and her very last thoughts were about her father and her career. Despite the few negatives, Gene DeWolf's death is an undeniable classic. But if you're at all deeper into Spider-Man fandom, there's a good chance you've heard of this story and even read it. I would argue it's kind of a breakpoint between Spider-Man eras. It paved the way for new kind of stories like Kraven's Last Hunt, which were a lot more dangerous and disturbing. These new stories look nothing like what came before. I would say Death of Gene Wolfe is one of my favorite stories. But there was a sequel to it. The sequel is a 3-issue arc starting from issue 134, Return of the Sin Eater. This one's illustrated by Sal Buscema. The Return of the Sin Eater deals with the Sin Eater's return to society. He was considered mentally insane, quite accurate I'd say, and now he's cured, which comes with a lot of difficulties for everyone. Sin Eater's case was famous in Marvel Universe, so people are aware of him and they hate him. They harass him and threaten him, and he almost gets killed by a mob. The other problem is Spider-Man hates his guts too. Spider-Man doesn't believe for a second that Sin Eater got better, so Spider-Man keeps following Sin Eater around waiting for the moment he steps out of line. Spider-Man takes the whole Sin Eater case pretty hard. The Wolves, they've really got our boy, and he's hurting over it. Spider-Man's on edge, ready to pop off. He's extra volatile, and you just watch Spider-Man unravel over these two stories because of what feels like an unjust release of a killer who killed his friend. This story includes one of my favorite gags, where MJ cuts all the references to Sin Eater out of the paper. Snip, snip, snip. I love it. It's really cute. Then there's the final twist, which is that Sin Eater's isn't fully cured. The man's now in control, but the voice of Sin Eater still haunts him, taunting him to go back into his old ways. It's not a simple story of a cured man, it's a story of a potentially cured man who may or may not be a time bomb ready to go off one day. This is what makes Peter David's run as a whole so good. It's more complicated without trying to be edgy. Death of Jean the Wolf shocks you, but the gore isn't the point. The misery isn't the point. These stories want you to look at justice and ask uncomfortable questions on what even is the point of jail. Do we jail people for punishment or rehabilitation? Do we give justice for the wolf by locking him up for the rest of his life, or do we give him justice by recognizing he wasn't himself? It's complicated. It's what makes the story so effective. It's real. They do change up the inking style, so you no longer have the heavy shadows that made the original look atmospheric, which is a shame. I like Buscema's art here, but I wish it had the darker look to support him. I don't know where to put this, there's no real point to this, but Sin Eater appears in like 1 or 2 issues between these stories. He helps like one cop character with a case by giving him advice, so he does make an extra appearance, not much to it, but it's there, and you don't know he's still insane by this point. It's kind of almost a tease for this story of, has he gotten better? Like, why is he helping Spider-Man now? It's interesting. I love the Wolf's character. She's a minor support character, and her biggest story doesn't even properly include her. Despite that, I really do love this character. Not every character has to be super important, book-altering presence. Sometimes the ones we connect with are the deceptively small characters. The Wolf's character was small, but I loved her. Probably a little too much. And I love the death of Jean the Wolf. I'll give it real with you. I don't really have a point. I just really wanted to share some love to one of my favorite stories of all time and a small character that I really fell in love with.